we're going to lead a little bit different. We're going to do a little audience participation to begin with. So how many are interested in being a participant right now? Volunteers? Okay, we got some brave people because I didn't even say what you're volunteering for. Jesus, we're talking about cage fighting. You guys are already volunteering. Yeah, exactly. So, show of hands for volunteers one more time. So, keep your hands up if you're still wanting to be a volunteer. We got less people already. So, what you're volunteering for is you're going to come up here and I'm going to punch you repeatedly in the face as hard as I can for the duration of my talk. So, we got slightly less people. So today we're going to be talking about cage fighting. We're going to be talking about mixed martial arts. I'm not actually going to have anybody volunteer and repeatedly beat them in the face. I know that most of you are probably asking yourselves, well, who in the hell would actually want to volunteer for that? But the reality is that, every single day people are volunteering, signing up in droves for getting punched in the face repeatedly. So today, we're going to be talking about the sociology of mixed martial arts. We're going to be talking about why people engage in something that rational people would run away from, When a fight breaks out, your natural instinct is to basically run away, right? So we're going to be talking about the sociology of mixed martial arts. We're going to be talking about why people engage in it, and we're going to try and get some better perspective. So to begin with, for those of you that aren't fans, that don't necessarily know what mixed martial arts is, loosely, we can describe it as two people get locked into a cage and they try and tear each other's head off. So you can use a variety of skills. You can use wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, any way that you can to either make the person submit under threat of being choked out or under threat of being knocked out. So again, we're going to be talking about the sociology of mixed martial arts, also called MMA, also called cage fighting. And so again, cage fighting is basically two people beating the crap out of each other. And I can talk about that all I want, but in order to really understand what we're talking about, we have to get some visual representations. So, aren't you glad that the projector came back on? So, what we're looking at here is mixed martial arts in action. And so, I loved the responses. I loved the, So, again, why would any rational human being voluntarily sign up and be covered in blood, get the crap beaten out of them? We know the reasons why people should not. It's counter to the civilizing process. We like to think that we live in a civilized world. We look down on the days of Roman gladiator combat, sacrificing Christians to the lions. There's the constant risk of injury. We see just a short glimpse of their lives, but their daily existence is dedicated to training. It's dedicated to doing that day in and day out, and oftentimes the injuries come not in the form of the actual competition, but in the preparation for the competition. We see in the news constantly, recently we're talking about traumatic brain injury and the risk of completely scrambling your noggin based on even concussive force. You don't even have to get knocked out. Just getting punched in the face day in and day out lightly can completely scramble your brain. So again, the question is, why would anybody sign up for this? And so we look to sociology. Sociology, I know that I'm a little bit biased, but I really enjoy it. I think that it's a great way of understanding exactly why people do the things that they do. Sociologists have something called the sociological imagination, which is a fancy way of looking at things. And it's understanding, it's basically connecting the dots between the micro, the meso, and the macro to gain a better understanding. So we're going to begin with the micro and expand out to the macro cultural aspect of cage fighting. So the micro level, we're going to be talking about why I, a rational, well, somewhat rational human being, would voluntarily engage in that. And so we have to understand the process of grad school. When you sign up for grad school and you are greeted, the first thing that they say is, welcome to grad school. What is your research question? And like any other grad student, I made it up. And I'm like, I like UFC? I don't know. And so I needed to find my research question. And I know that I'm a very active person. The last thing that I want to do is spend my time sitting in a library doing research. To me, that's torture. And so instead of doing that torture, I figured, why not do real torture? So I went and I signed myself up at a mid-level gym, and I spent 2 years in the field repeatedly getting punched in the face and then going home and writing notes. Fun, right? And what I learned along the way, basically my first week in, they put me in the ring against somebody who with one arm, and I basically got knocked out. That was my introduction. That was my hazing process. And along the way, I had everything from mild concussions, broken toes, microfractures in my hands. I had a dislocated rib that I continued to fight with for weeks on end until somebody kicked it back into place. So that's the negatives, and that's definitely along the reasons why we would think, why in the hell would anybody do that? But I also experienced positives. It's fun. So Reggie Jackson said that hitting a home run is better than sex. I don't know if I would go that far, but pulling off a flying armbar on somebody who is trying to murder you is damn entertaining, right? So we can understand the micro level. We can understand why I would be interested in it. But the micro level is just one aspect. For all we know, I am masochistic and should be locked in a mental hospital. That doesn't give us any sort of understanding of the larger sociological happenings of mixed martial arts. And so we need to expand. And in expanding, I started having informal conversations, I started interviewing people, and I started trying to understand why others fight, which brings us to the meso level. So in these conversations with other sadistic people who enjoy getting punched in the face, I learned some interesting things. I learned that a lot of them are looking for status attainment. You know, you tell somebody that that's your hobby, that your hobby is to get beaten up, or better for status attainment is beat other people up, and people often can think pretty awesome about you. Other people were talking about self-defense, talking about the need in case anything happens, which is entertaining because most of the people who do this are like middle class, living in the suburbs, that they never gonna really actually find themselves in a real fight. So self-defense was another reason. But larger, looking at the thematic elements of the responses, a lot of people were basically looking for a safe space to exercise hypermasculinity. They wanted to, you know, in society, if I see any of you guys in the parking lot and I punch you in the face, that kind of gets frowned upon. But if we throw on little 4-ounce gloves and go into a cage, then fair game, right? And so that's what we see with the meso level. But again, that's just one piece of the puzzle. That's just one, you know, several people's stories out of one gym. That doesn't necessarily give us the whole experience. And so we can combine the micro level with the meso level and kind of gain a better understanding. But to fully understand, we got to bring in that third component. So we got to talk about the macro level, the cultural response, why a society would want to do that. It's not that mixed martial arts came out of a vacuum. What I learned in my research is that mixed martial arts is one piece of a puzzle. It's part of a constant evolution of what it is to do masculinity. When you look at movies from the early 1900s, you look at like Humphrey Bogart was the epitome of man. And he was kind of pudgy, kind of, we would see him on the street and he's not very imposing. And when you superimpose that against The Rock, who's all roided out, like 250 pounds of just muscle, and the guns that they use versus the little mini handgun that Humphrey Bogart had and the little revolver, we see that there's been a constant evolution of masculinity in this country. And so looking at the macro level, we see this escalation of violence, an escalation of force, an escalation of what it is to be masculine in our society. And MMA is just one piece of the puzzle. MMA is a cultural response to how our youth were raised during a certain time period. And we can understand this in context. So if we go back to the 1950s and 60s, and we look at what it meant, what was the epitome of masculinity in the 50s and 60s, we see Hell's Angels. The badass bikers with the tattoos that would ride their hogs through, loud, aggressive, domineering. And what was the cultural response? What happened to the people who grew up idolizing the Hell's Angels? Well, you get the weekend warrior. You get the middle-aged, midlife crisis, riding the moped, pretending, like revving the little tiny engine, thinking that they're Billy Badass. And so we see that time and time again, the way in which people are raised, the cultural ideology during your youth has an impact on the way that you're raised. And so 50s and 60s, Hell's Angels leads to the weekend warrior. Well, what about the 70s going into the early 80s? We see Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee of a 135-pound badass who could come into a room full of ninjas and just clear the joint out. And so what's the cultural response there? Well, you get the karate point sparring. You get the middle-aged guy who, signs up at one of the McDojos thinking that they're badass. They do sparring, but, you barely touch them. It's not full contact, and they think of themselves as, Bruce Lee's, as modern-day ninjas. And so the question then becomes, how did we get MMA? Well, we got to look at my generation. My generation grew up Hulkamania, right? The WWF. You finally get these big, large, imposing figures like Hulk Hogan. And the result is an escalation. So this is kind of interesting because when we go back and we look at the Hell's Angel leading into the Weekend Warrior, or you get Bruce Lee into the point sparring, you see a more nerfed, tamed down version of the cultural ideology that they grew up with. And this is the first generation that we see an expansion. You see things escalating into more realistic, more violent, and more dangerous. And so that is a function of the escalation of masculinity. It goes hand in hand with the reason why you have Humphrey Bogart leading into, Sylvester Stallone. So what we see here is in order to understand a sociological phenomenon, in order to understand why people do what they do, it's important to understand perspective. Because understanding just one piece of the puzzle gives us just one piece of the puzzle. It doesn't give us a complete picture. And so I will leave you with this question. If we have these cultural responses from the Hell's Angel to the Weekend Warrior, and if my generation grew up with WWF, and the result is the most violent, brutal sport that we have, what's going to happen with the next generation? What about these kids that are growing up and their cultural icon, their idol of masculinity is a mixed martial artist. How is that going to evolve, and what is their cultural response going to be? So, thank you very much. Sorry for the technical difficulty, and enjoy the rest of your day.